a cloud.
All
All
right.
right, take it away.
Way. So hi, everybody, and I don't know if we have any other visitors online. Doesn't look like it at the moment, but so this is so I'm Priscilla Ryder. I'm on the sustainability committee for the city for the town of Maynard. And we are doing this three-part series on climate resilience. The first part of our series was Sally Warner, who's a climate scientist, provided us with a big overview of what's happening with climate in the world. So now I'm in the screen, so I'm so and this next the series tonight is to talk about what's happening in Maynard. What are the problems that we're anticipating having to deal with, and then what are some of the things we're already doing, and what do we want to do in the future? And then our last series will be on March 9th, where we're really going to brainstorm. We have $50,000 that came through our grant, our MVP 2.0 grant, and we need to spend it on something that helps us deal with climate resilience. So our task really is to come up with a plan and figure out how to spend that money. And our job tonight is really to figure out what we're doing already. So we have 4 speakers tonight. In advance of Julia Flannery, who is she's our environmental compliance and data manager for the water department. So she'll be speaking first, and she is online tonight. And then Christopher Troiano, who's the deputy chief of police, who deals with obviously emergencies and planning ahead. And then Amy Lovelace, who's the director of on the Council on Aging, and then Lucas Lynn, who's isn't on the list, but he's one of our high school students who has been helping us with our climate MVP 2.0. So he'll be giving us kind of the, you know, what are our students thinking about climate change and how we deal with that. So without further ado, Julia, do you want to jump on and just speak? And we can, I don't know how we can make it just you. Lord, Zan, I don't know if you can do that, but anyway, we can see you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, yeah, so I think that big elephant in the room is, I'm from the water department. Right now, we're very in the news because of a lot of our concerns about discoloration. So this is like perfect timing, because a lot of the concerns that you may have heard around our discolored water, particularly in the southern part of the town, is a direct correlation to climate change and to what's kind of happening right now. As a lot of you may know, we are currently in a critical 3 drought. We left that level for about a month or two months. It's about 2 months. We left for December. We came back in February. So there was like a very short amount of time where the state felt like, okay, the levels are coming back up. But we are now going back into a drought. To be in a level 3 drought in January or in February is unprecedented. So what I look at is we are having, discolored water. We're having these issues in February when we haven't even, we're not in the high season of summer. What is the next 6 months going to look like? And so a lot of my job as environmental compliance manager is forecasting and looking at ensuring how we are going to stay compliant with state and federal regulations around our drinking water. But not only that, but how are we going to supply a town with drinking water? And unfortunately, the reason why many people in town turn on their taps and see brown water is because it's either, brown or discolored water or no water. We don't have another option. We are at an emergency state. And I think that, this has been something that we've talked about for many years in town. And it was always like a what if scenario of like, well, we put these other wells on, and they've always just been able to make it work somehow. And discolored water has always been an issue, but right now is like a perfect storm of events. So we have this critical drought. We aren't able to we're pumping as much as we can of the other wells to try to bring down the level of discoloration that we're pumping into the system. However, starting on March 15th, I think is turtle season starts. Correct me if I'm wrong. But when turtle season starts, we have a turtle called a Blanding's turtle, which is a very endangered species that lives in Maynard in one of the wetlands that feeds our aquifer where we pump our water from. We will have to reduce pumping from our wells to ensure that the turtles have a habitat. They're losing their habitat rapidly. When we pump our wells, we're pulling that water out. So those are the kinds of things that I'm dealing with. Everything is connected. Everything, I used to be in conservation. This job is not as far off. It has a lot of overlapping parts. So yeah, I'd be happy to discuss and answer all your questions as we go along.
Right. So that was a great overview, Julia. So I think our next speaker is Deputy Chief of Police Christopher Triano, and he's going to just give us an idea of what's happening with the town. And I think if you stand here, you kind
That
of.
was right there. Good.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
All right, good.
Yeah.
You look great.
I'm trying not to put my back to anybody, but it's hard. So I apologize. I'm not being rude. I'm just trying to find the spot there. So maybe over here is a little bit better. So yeah, I kind of pinch hitting a little
The
bit
camera is there.
for the fire chief who couldn't make it. So she kind of asked if I would step in. So a lot of this is kind of her purview. So I'm going to do my best to be Angela Lawless tonight because she was a big shoot to fill. She does a great job as the emergency management director and things like that. So I'll just kind of give a brief overview of kind of what we do
That's good.
overall from like a public safety standpoint. So there's kind of a whole lot of information here that I have, and I'll try and break it down as much as I can. But again, a lot of it's fire side. So I'll try and escape my lane, although I'll probably have to go into that side a little bit, but I will be talking kind of a lot of it. So over the past year, the town and public safety in general has kind of worked on updating the town's comprehensive emergency management plan. So it's kind of in the works, and they've been working on that. So again, the timing of this is pretty good too, right? So they're in the final stages of kind of drafting that plan. It'll be available for public viewing at some point on the website, and they'll make that if it's not already available for the public to view. So, and what that plan does, it covers kind of a broad range of potential emergencies that we may deal with. And Maine is not unique or, to any other city in town. We can all deal with the same type of situations potentially, right? So droughts, flooding, extreme heat, cold, storm damage, probably the most common one we see a lot, but so the plan will kind of cover all of those aspects of it. And then the plan also involves all the kind of key decision makers. So the police chief, the fire chief, public works director, town administrator, they're kind of all involved too, because they all bring different assets and, to a potential emergency, right? So obviously the police and fire do what we do, but public works may be able to bring barricades or, large vehicles, things like that, the sandbags or something they may have access to. The town administrator may have access to funding sources or reimbursement, things like that at a higher level. So all those, stakeholders kind of in play as part of the plan as well. So we kind of keep that in mind as we build out the plan. And then in case of an emergency or some type of environmental issue that may happen, the resources that may respond could, obviously vary, right? So the town works closely with MEMA, which is Mass Emergency Management Association, which is the state level of FEMA, right? So FEMA obviously being the national one, and then MEMA being at the state level. So a lot of mutual aid goes into this, and a lot of state agencies, right? So there's a lot of partnerships with other fire departments, police departments, things like that, kind of come together collectively throughout these things, even on the public works side, to help manage a large scale event that we may be dealing with. The fire department is part of District 14. I think Actually, those patches on the wall might be District 14. There's about 20 towns or so in District 14. The state breaks their fire districts down into a fire departments down into districts. So if Maynard was to have an emergency, they would pull from District 14. So another part of the state might be District 12, depending on where you live, right? So Maynard being District 14, large scale event, they need a lot of ambulances. There's already a plan set up through District 14 to provide that. A technical rescue, whatever it might be, that's all kind of in place already. And a lot of that falls under the ICS incident command system, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. When you see, police or fire kind of managing a large scale incident, they manage it under ICS, which is the incident command system. Oddly enough, the incident command system was started out in California years and years ago because they had no way to manage large scale wildfires. So in order to do that, because they brought in an enormous amount of resources, air assets, everything you could think of, the way they really managed that was they set up this incident command system out in California to manage large scale wildfires that kind of spread throughout the country years and years ago. And that's really used even down to a small house fire in Maine. The incident command system is used to kind of manage that. So they kind of brought that all into play. So all those things are used to mitigate any type of response. And getting back to the District 14 and mutual aid, all that stuff is kind of in play already. So when it happens, they kind of already know who to call, right? What agency to reach out to get the assets that they need. So, and that goes all into kind of the town's plan as well. So, and including the hazmat situations, anything you can really think of is kind of already thought of in that plan and will be pushed out to assist Maynard specifically if we ever had some type of incident we need additional resources. They're available to help us. So, some of the other things, obviously, local agencies work with Council on Aging, right? The Housing Authority, local churches to kind of target some of those vulnerable populations. I mean, we've seen it just this week, probably with the ice, right? I mean, that alone can kind of keep people homebound, right? I mean, just a small scale ice storm really can affect people, right? How do we manage that on a larger scale? We had a pretty good storm I think it was last summer, last spring, a lot of poles and stuff knocked down, and we were dealing with trying to evacuate some vulnerable populations of housing not too far from here and how to get them out and maybe talking to council agents to use some of their vans at the time to maybe transport people on, right? Because we don't have access to that. So really like just pooling our resources and thinking a lot of that stuff ahead of time is really helpful in getting to know people ahead of time. So when it does happen as an incident, we've already spoken about it, we've already talked. I mean, I've talked to Amy a lot of times, right? So it makes it easy when something happens to have that conversation. And that's part of it too. The whole plan is just kind of having that in place. But again, making sure we know what that targeted population or vulnerable population is and how we can kind of help evacuations, temporary shelter, working with the school system to maybe open up a shelter at the school. And then how do we get food and things like that? So a lot of that is talked about and planned ahead. We've done some tabletop exercises in here with MEMA on flooding and exactly, how we would manage that. So those are extremely helpful, and continuing to do those where it would still be extremely helpful because it's a perishable skill. We talk about these things and we plan for them, but if you don't really sit down in a room together with everybody every so often, every couple of months or whatever it might be, you kind of lose that skill set a little bit. So I'm really big on those tabletop exercises, coming together like this and just having a conversation that may spark someone's interest. Oh, geez, I never really thought of that, right? And that's kind of what it's all about. We can plan as much as we want, but they say all plans kind of change when it happens, right? So we'll do the best we can to plan for it, but we also have to plan for those contingencies too that will inevitably come up, at some point during the event. So again, a tabletop exercise is a great way to do that because they kind of throw those curveballs at you and say, well, now this happened. Well, you don't have this resource. You may have this resource. Kind of gets everybody thinking and brings everybody together from different town departments, health department, anybody you could think of is really involved in that thought process. So that's where we come from as an overall kind of overarching public safety view. We have plans in place. We talk about plans. We try and plan for it. Could we train and plan some more? Absolutely, you always could, right? And we'll certainly try and do that in the future and going forward. But I think we're in a good place. And if something happens, I'm fairly confident we can handle whatever emergency it is here in Maynard. And then of course, requesting additional outside resources to help us as well. So I'm fairly confident we're in good hands in case anybody was wondering. I just want to reassure you. I don't want to sit up here and say, oh no, it's all lost, right? The sky's falling. We're good. We can handle it. And we'll make sure that we do. So that's kind of my initial public safety spiel.
Excellent.
All right.
Terrific.
I'm just gonna adjust the camera just to see if we can get. So Amy's our next speaker, and Amy Lovelace is our
Council on Aging Director, and Council on Aging is our vulnerable population, and we asked her to speak with us because she can sort of shed some light on what people are struggling with, and it'll probably also affect other populations that are also.
I definitely think
Yeah.
so. So I've provided some PowerPoint slides. And this information is taken directly from the EPA's website, almost verbatim. But when I downloaded the information and read through the articles, it emphasized for me that anything that any of us are dealing with, whether you're an older adult and any kind of medical condition or disability, it's a whole nother ballgame when you're talking about extreme weather events. So anything that's difficult now that you struggle with on a day-to-day basis, or you have to be mindful of, whether it's medications or your functional level, it's going to be worse with an extreme weather event. And so you'll note things like people with limited mobility. There's a risk before, during, and after an extreme weather event. Older adults with some sort of cognitive disabilities like dementia, they're going to potentially have a harder time responding, understanding when they're in the midst of and coping. They're going to struggle with that when there's an extreme weather event. Older adults are depending for others on their care. And so if there's an extreme weather event and their sons and daughters are at the other end of town, you potentially have an issue. Older adults also, we know, live in homes and buildings which are older and have poor ventilation. So all of these different struggles that they currently have are going to be exacerbated by outdoor air pollution, heat. Like you said, when there's trees are down, power lines are down. It's just going to exacerbate their everyday life. And the next slide. There was a first slide that you missed. That one, yeah. So this was the first slide. As we all age, we're susceptible to these environmental hazards, whether it's young people all the way up to older adults, the health conditions, the medications, the higher temperatures, the compromised immune systems. It's not just older adults, but I work with older adults, so I know what they face on an everyday basis. Then you add the extreme weather events that are really concerning. The ticks and mosquitoes too. I mean, that's for individuals that have compromised immune systems. What's going to happen with increased ticks and mosquitoes? This is all going to impact older adults, and I think there's limitations for them in terms of whether they have caregivers locally, close by, what their housing situations are. Can they make changes to their homes? Maybe they can't make changes to their homes. So that's sort of an overview that I thought was important to particularly look at what older adults are facing with extreme weather events. I put these slides on this PowerPoint background. As you notice, it's water, because I think everything in Maynard comes back to water, whether it's not just having clean water, but it's also about the flooding. So my next slide is about the planning piece. Concerns that that I've heard from seniors coming and going from activities and classes on site, but also things that we're probably all thinking about. One thing that comes up for me as the director of the senior center is I think there needs to be more concerted effort in the town to have identifiable locations year round. It needs to be part of the flow of the conversation in town so that everyone knows where to go. It shouldn't pop up on a 90-degree day on the town's website that suddenly there's you can go someplace. It needs to be clear that this is always available. This fire station is always available, for hot, cold, emergency shelter. That should be so easily identifiable that no one ever has to question. They know immediately where to go when their house is too warm. So I think that's a priority for the town to get those identifiable respite locations clear in people's minds year round. I'm thinking about, and I know this is probably going to be in the emergency management plan that you're talking about, evacuation procedures and routes for flooded areas. I think about that. I live down in Marlborough. So when there's flooding going on and things are melting, I'm always thinking, how am I gonna get out of Maynard and get home? Because am I gonna go this way and what's gonna be flooded? And if I try to go down Gleasondale, it's gonna be a mess. And so I think that's another thing that's gotta be on people's radars in Maynard. What's gonna happen? What's the evacuation? How to respond to flooding issues. This is part of the emergency plan. We're kind of on the same page. It's increased information from the fire, police, and public health departments. And how that is put out there into the general public's awareness is probably for us to plan on making that happen and making it happen in a way that's in conjunction with each other, so that we're all in the same, getting that information out. I know one thing that's probably really important to touch base on is I know that the fire department, at one point, they were collecting, people could submit information, went into a database at the fire department, so people could identify who they are, what their needs were, so that if there was an issue, and they were called to someone's home, the police department, they would have information on that resident. And I know at one point, this might have been pre-COVID, the fire department had their own, they were going to start doing that as well. And I think that if there's a sense of a database for older adults and what the resident has special needs in their homes, we should talk about looking at those databases, seeing if they're active and how we can make a concerted effort to get seniors to sign up and have their information, available to first responders. And communications across departments and local organizations, that I think is a good thing. And sometimes that happens, like we work in tandem. So sometimes the housing authority is in touch with us and we're in touch with the housing authority. We're in touch with the fire and police. I think that's probably part of the emergency plan, and maybe bringing in some sort of task force that, in addition to what you're talking about, who's involved with the emergency planning, there might be a sort of community level task force to work on some of this planning on a more, not local level, but among the members of the community to tackle some of these, what I see are things that need planning for. So those are some of the things that seniors face. And those are some of my thoughts about what we need to, as a community, sort of work towards, which I think is communication across the board. Because it's going to happen. There's going to be a day when I'm not going to be able to get home. Because I'm going to try to go down to Gleasondale. I'm going to try to head out 27. And, and if I'm thinking about that, what is someone else thinking about? What is someone thinking about on Summerhill Road? Or, there's different locations in town where the flooding is tremendous. And I think, preparation is so key at this point. So I'm glad that the emergency plan is moving forward. I can't wait to read it. And I think a local sort of task force on a community level with, stakeholders, whether it's, pantries, the Council on Aging, members of various committees, just, getting some of this moving forward. And, those are my thoughts. Do you have any questions for me? Any thoughts or questions that you'd, I had one thought too, when we're talking about engaging the community. I had thought quite a while ago, not just, engaging the community about crises or emergencies, but this whole issue with all these different changes. I had thought at one point it might be useful to have some sort of event on a particular day for the whole community. We had talked about that around Earth Day, and you had done that, I think, pre-COVID. It might be a wonderful opportunity to get the community gathered around presentations and information and signing up for these databases. So I think looking at trying to do that again in the future would be something really wonderful to Maynard, to have a full day of activity and resources available. So hopefully we can talk about, doing something that again like that. Any questions for me as the Council on Aging Director? I think this is a great opportunity. I'm really excited about the emergency plan is coming into place, and we're going to hear about that. And it's exciting to be active about this. that's my thoughts,
Okay.
and that's my perspective on what seniors are facing.
Excellent, and that's great, great information, Amy. And then our last speaker, and I'm still trying to figure out how to make everybody be able to be included. Our last speaker is Lucas Lynn, who is a high school student, as I mentioned, and after his presentation, we'll try to engage in a discussion and see if anybody else has any questions. So Lucas, sort of stand where I'm
Trying to
at.
find the ideal angle.
Yeah.
Can you see me? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, so I'm Lucas and I'm a high school student and the community liaison of this project. So, I mean, I'm the student, so I can't like do as much as you guys did, but I can still like talk about some common issues.
Stand a little bit over and then just kind of look at the camera too and just see.
Okay, yeah.
Or just see how you were, or a little bit closer to me and then. It's like I'm planning. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm probably just gonna talk about some common problems that maybe students are experiencing, also like other families are experiencing in like maybe the past year, and talk about how I think maybe the town should focus on some populations that I think are kind of vulnerable to the changing climate and some actions. So, so I'm just gonna clarify my role first. Is I'm kind of like serving as like a connector between the student population and of course you guys who are making the decision, and yeah, I'm pushing this project forward. So of course some climate related issues, of course heat, and also recently this year it's really kind of cold and icy, so I've been hearing like a lot of complaints among my peers about like the road condition and these, which, as Amy said, it's of course it affects the senior citizens, and it also affects, of course, children, especially at a younger age. They may slip and fall, and then some unfortunate stuff, and also, wait, one second. So something else is that I believe a huge group that is probably overlooked by a lot of people is there are students at the high school who are like, I guess, less fortunate financially, and also those families who maybe they don't speak English, their English skills not very well, who don't have the equal amount of chance to kind of learn about the climate change and learn about the impact it can have on them. And they're also the population that are probably affected by it the most, especially if you think about on a very cold day, if they have to go somewhere, and if their parents don't have, let's say, if they don't have a vehicle, if they're forced to walk, then possibility of incidents can occur at a more likely rate. So next, I'm probably gonna talk about what I think you guys should focus a little bit on this project regarding the students. So I think Earth Day is a great idea, and we did it last year. We had like a professor from Brandeis coming to the school talk about climate change, and like, yeah, on Earth Day, I actually think that the students loved it. So maybe do something similar like that this year. There is also, so I'm not sure if you guys know, but like every senior is required to do the senior project to graduate at the high school. So, and I know because one of my neighbor, he graduated last year. He did climate like a climate change related. It's kind of like a research paper, or it's like activism that you can do. So yeah, he kind of did something related to climate change. So I think maybe we should do a better job to if they do have this idea of doing something that is climate change related, that will help the community to get better and be more resilient to climate change. I think we should do a better job to help them to connect with the town, with the officials who are making making the decisions, and yeah, and maybe encourage them to do senior projects that are related to climate change, maybe provide some type of like grants or whatever to people who are willing to do it and invest their like entire year on trying to fix like a certain problem in the town. Yeah, and that's about it. And
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. So you know what, let's put a chair next to Amy, and Lucas, why don't you sit next to Amy, and then I'm gonna see if we can put the camera on you guys.
You
See
just
how
tilt
far I
it down a
have.
little bit.
Yeah, let me just tilt it down.
There we go.
There we go. So now we have our speakers and Julia, sorry. So I think one of the themes I'm hearing is we are preparing ourselves for climate change and just sort of disasters in general, or just being able to address that, which is making us resilient, right? So that's a good thing. And we are looking at resilience and sort of understanding all the players here and the issues that the town is dealing with is really helpful. So thanks to all four of you for kind of enlightening us and kind of what we're doing already. So I guess the question is, are there any comments from any of or questions from any of the audience, either in here or there's one person here, go ahead.
Sure, I have a question for Julia.
Yeah,
I don't know much about the existing like water infrastructure in Maynard. I have read stories though of other towns that were having issues with water supply. And in some cases, the solution or a way of addressing it was like gray water systems where like you don't need to be using potable water to like there are certain uses for water in a town where you don't need potable water. And so, having a sort of separate system for those situations so that you're not dipping into the supply of potable water for like situations where it's not needed. Do we have any kind of system like that?
So we do encourage like residents to be using, especially when we go into our water restrictions. We haven't reached that point in the draft yet, but it will probably be becoming sooner than later. To use, rain barrels. As when it comes to use of non-potable water in homes, there unfortunately, Massachusetts hasn't come up with a great way of putting that into like a plumbing code that makes it so you can use gray water in a residential situation. So, I think hopefully they'll start to figure that out soon. From a town perspective, the things that we do is we just got a new water treatment plant back online with 2 new well fields. I was gonna say wells, but there's multiple wells in them. And we use something called a backwash system. So as you can imagine, and this sounds counterintuitive, but there's a lot of water use when you treat water that gets wasted and then you have to actually dump it out. And that's because, we're constantly backwashing or pushing, like cleaning our filters out. We're using water for many different uses within the plant, such as to maintain pressure through the system. And so what we've been able to do at our well forward treatment plant, also known as our Green Meadow treatment plant, that's the one that's behind the school. We spent 5 to 7 years trying to get it online and finally did. And what it does is it brings that water that would normally just get thrown away, get put into a septic system, and it puts it back into the system to be treated. So it goes out into a tank, a holding tank, and some stuff kind of settles out, and then it goes back into the system to be treated. So we're really trying to recycle water as much as possible. And we hope that in the next iteration of, when we go to update or, expand any of the other plants, that recycling will be put into place. It's very new for Maynard. It's not super new for Massachusetts, but DEP is still kind of getting used to it. They separate water into surface water and groundwater. And there's two different measures that we have to meet. Recycled water is a new territory. And so how do we go about, encouraging more recycling of water in the treatment plant process? And also meeting all of the standards that we need to meet. But yeah, from our perspective, that's kind of where we're trying to reuse water. And yeah, I think from a residential perspective, I definitely encourage rain barrels as much as possible. Anytime you don't, need to turn on your tap outside is a good thing.
Thank you. I
Uh,
have a follow-up question for Julia. In the past, you've talked about flooding, widespread flooding in the town. I was wondering if you could just give us an overview of the issues you've seen in the past and kind of touch on that topic a little bit.
Sorry, that was really quiet. I think you
Okay.
said
She's asking about flooding and issues about flooding in the town, and if you have any
Just an overview of the issues you've seen.
an overview of the issues that you've seen that we might start thinking about, like what are the problems?
Yeah. So in my old position as conservation agent, I was also involved in stormwater management. I'm not so much in this role. So I won't go too deep into that just because that's no longer my area of expertise. But what I can say is that flooding will most likely be our number one issue, which is funny because it's flooding and drought. So it's either we have too much water or we don't have enough water, or the water that we need is just not going in the right places. And so, what's important there is in stormwater management, making sure that, I was working with the planning board on doing a lot of sustainable development or green infrastructure to ensure that we're getting the water back into the ground and less runoff. Our stormwater infrastructure is very old. A lot of the stormwater infrastructure that we have in town was actually the first sewer infrastructure. And then we decided that, sewer and stormwater should be separate and we shouldn't just dump our sewer into the river. So our sewer now goes to a treatment plant and our stormwater goes directly into the river. So we're using a lot of really old pipes. And, the whole system is it's constantly chasing, these broken and old infrastructure. So the best example is in front of Great Road, in front of Tiger Drive, there's a flash flood area. That flash flood area is not because it's a low point. It's lower, but the reason why the water floods there so badly is because the stormwater infrastructure for that area is connected to wetlands that are so it's supposed to drain into the wetland. And there's a little wetland in front of Fowler, kind of tucked in into that woods. And so what happens when it rains is, Great Road has a lot of stormwater runoff. It goes into the system, goes and drains into the wetland. The wetland fills up and then it backs up into the road. And that's the worst part is there's nothing we can do at that point, but wait. And Deputy Chief probably can tell you better than I can that, a lot of times we send our police officers out there and we just have to block the road until the water recedes itself because there's just truly nowhere to put it anymore. So I think it's something to think about as we look at different ways of containing stormwater. It used to be just pipe it somewhere and it'll disappear. And now we really have to think about, okay, what happens when that area that we're piping it to backs up? We need more storage and we need more ways to get the water to recede or go into the ground.
Thanks, Julia. Go ahead, Kate.
I wondered if, Chris or Amy had a sense of how many people are using the cooling stations, and they particularly, sort of, who's got cooling in their houses and who doesn't on these high heat days? Are those numbers, are we following those numbers?
So could you hear that out there, Zana? Could you hear that? Okay.
Good.
I don't know if there's exact numbers, and maybe Amy
Yeah.
might not know,
Yeah,
but
just, yeah, go ahead.
it's hard to track a little bit because it's such a voluntary thing, right? For people to come even to a cooling station when it's obvious that people should come. It's a personal choice a lot of times. So, right, so that's kind of what we deal with too. So we may have extreme temperatures and open up a cooling center and get 3 people when we thought we'd get 30,
Right.
because, I get it. People just don't want to leave their homes. Is sometimes what you're dealing with, right? So, we can encourage as much as we want. We can put on social media as much as we can about the cooling station and encourage people to go, but it really comes down to a personal choice.
Yeah.
Heat or cold, because we've kind of dealt with both. But we do our best to kind of, really encourage them to. There has been instances where there's been power outages that may be extended. That might be a little different, because then we can really knock on doors in at that affected area and say, you really should leave, because you're not gonna get power back for 3 or 4 days potentially. Do alternative, arrangements, maybe come to the cooling stations, that's a little bit different, but the general, just it's really hot, is hard to kind of manage.
And Amy, are you seeing people using the council on the aging building? I don't even know what the air conditioning situation is.
Yeah, I mean, we
there.
have great air conditioning,
Yeah, good.
but I think it's just, my sense is it has to be more well advertised. And I think a senior center space that was easier accessibility than our current spaces would make it more amenable and agreeable for people just to come in, hang out, have a bite to eat. More centrally located senior center space would probably just become in and of itself a cool place to be, to cool off. So and I think we're kind of restricted up there. I mean, so.
And I suspect one of the problems is some of those people would probably not also be able to get there. So,
Yeah.
so the question is, if there are more people that need to be cooled, but they're just not getting there, like how do we as a community help to figure that out? And I don't know the answer, but that's one of those
Yeah.
outreach things, like how do we know that?
Right, because we deal with, transportation or lack of issues as well as mobility issues.
Right, right.
On both sides of
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
so.
yeah.
What's the
Go-
threshold for, when would you open a cooling center? What temperature does it need to be outside?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know there's a lot of back and forth between the town, the fire chief, the police chief that will kind of collaborate, and sometimes there's direction from the state that will push that down and say, but I don't know if there's I think you could probably do whenever you wanted, right? There's not really you can't do it now, you could probably do it, but I mean, I will say from experience, because the cooling station used to be at the police station, our training room, until the fire station was built, and now it's this room, it's kind of what they use here. And there's been weekends when we've had it open for the weekend and not one person showed up, so, yeah, certainly an outreach.
And yeah, so maybe at all these, community fairs and things that happen, is making sure that kind of information is being distributed, on a regular basis, just so that we're doing our jobs of informing the public and making sure that our neighbors are telling our neighbors so that people know.
We have a couple of questions online.
Okay, you wanna manage that, Zana?
So one I think was already answered, maybe, like where are the cooling stations? So is it just the fire station or are there some others?
Do you open them?
I mean, seniors are always welcome to come to the senior center. So, I mean, anyone, if it's a hot day and you need to get senior centers there. So especially seniors, we always encourage people to, and I think most senior centers do that as well. It's always publicized in their newsletters, come cool off. And that's always the goal.
Okay. And then, so follow-up question to that, do you put that in the Action Unlimited and the new COA newsletter?
That would be in the new Council on Aging newsletter. Yeah,
Okay.
so thank you for reminding me, whoever put that question, I'll make sure I point that out when we start getting hot, just people to stop by and hang out with us.
We can also do a regional, a townwide mailing, a postcard. I know a lot of communities in the region are sending a postcard in like May to let them know where the cooling centers are and how to find out more information about that. So that's
That's a good
something we
idea.
can do through this grant. Well, and that's a relatively low cost.
Any other questions, Anna?
Yeah, and so one other question kind of asks about the sort of financial resilience of our emergency management. So if there were less FEMA funding, for instance, how resilient would our emergency responses and other services be to that?
So, and I don't want to speak for Chief Lawless, who's the emergency management director, but I think most of the funding would not come from FEMA. That would be a large scale, you know, like you see in the news type California wildfires type thing is when FEMA would get involved. It would mostly be at the local level, just the town, you know, ability to sustain that through their budget, and then potentially MEMA through the state. But it's pretty much all going to be at the local level, which seems to be handled accordingly. A good part of the plan is the mutual aid aspect of it. So, you know, the fire department has the ability to you know, reach out to X number of fire departments who can share resources that we necessarily aren't paying for because it comes through a partnership through mutual aid. So that certainly offsets some of the costs, but most of it is at the state level, not FEMA.
And flooding in the town, just to clarify, I mean, I know that we have a good river going through it. We have a dam that's above our town. What are the kinds of flooding issues that we've had? I know that, Julia just mentioned that we have an infrastructure issue, so we have localized flooding that's on the roadway that's based on, not on an overflow of the river, but are we having any issues with the river overflow, and have we had any damage related to that in the last 10 years or so?
That may be more for the public works director, but
Okay.
I would say from my experience, no. I mean, 117 is certainly one of the issues Julia touched on. That's one of the main, or the probably main flooding issue. The other one is Main Street, just by Main and Jordan Widow, just down the street from the police station there. That kind of floods a lot there too. And a lot of, again, just goes back to infrastructure. Well, there are certain instances where, you know, in the fall, depending on the time of year, storm drains get clogged up because of leaves and things like that. So people clearing those things in front of their house certainly would help that, you know, because there has been instances where we've had flooding on a street. Public Works will come out and able to find the storm drain, clear it, and that really alleviates the water right then and there. If it's not an infrastructure issue, sometimes it's just a weather issue with the leaves and stuff covering. So,
Right,
but those are kind of the two main ones. Nothing other than that that's really been too overbearing.
right. Julia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so the last time our river overtopped itself was in the beginning of the summer. So right before we went into a drought, the river was like super high and then it went super low very quickly, which was really difficult for a lot of our wildlife. So, you know, luckily what we saw when the river did overtop was it was a result of rain that like it was delayed a couple of days, which was really good, because if it had been at the same time that we were getting the large storms, the flooding would have been even worse. Most of our storm drains in downtown do go directly into the river. So what we were seeing was a backup, and if you looked down into the catch basins in downtown, you probably see some standing water there as it backed up into the pipes. We have our other big issue where we have flooding is the basin, and depending on how long you've lived here and what generation you're from, you call that area something different. But it's the parking lot or the triangle that is where Babico's is. And so in that area, we also really struggle with pushing the water out. Because again, it's just really low lying, and there's a lot of infrastructure that's tied into the catch basins there. It's just really hard to get that water to get pumped out. And we don't use any pumps in any part of our stormwater. We fully rely on gravity. So that makes it really difficult. I will say, like, the last time that we had a major flooding event, we ended up having a beaver that like decided to accidentally go downtown. And we were trying to figure out why he was walking around downtown. It's most likely because he just got confused because the river hadn't been that high. He was able to get out of the canal part. And so, you know, it's just really interesting how flooding, all the parts can be affected, including our wildlife.
Any other questions, Zana, on our list?
That's all I've got for online.
Okay, we have one more here.
I just have a question, for Julia, in terms of what you were just saying about the triangle where Babacos is. I know that a lot of the sort of land above that, right, because it's a very depressed area. I'm doing hand gestures, but you can't see. But above that, a lot of there's a lot of turf and gravel. There's not a lot of like vegetation. I guess my question is, has there been any talk about trying to implement some vegetation in that like above part that might help to absorb some of that water that's all getting like washed down into that depressed area?
Yeah, I you know, when I was over in planning and conservation, there was a lot of talk. That area is called Memorial Park. And there was a lot of talk about, you know, how do we use that space? And I think that conversation is still ongoing. You know, that's really one of our only like community spaces that's directly downtown. So to be able to gather, you know, for our festivals, for our tree lighting, to have that space is really important. But also, how do we bring in maybe some more green infrastructure? I, you know, was a part of a few grants or grant applications that we did not receive. I wrote, you know, an earmark to get more green infrastructure downtown that we did not receive. So we're definitely trying on the town side, not just in that area, but, you know, I was working for about 4 years to get some rain gardens, particularly right outside of CVS, to kind of capture some of that water before it goes down into that area. And it's a competitive market out there. And yeah, so I hope that they continue to do that on over on the conservation side of town, but it's definitely something that we're all working towards.
So Julia, a question to you, anything in those grant applications that's $50,000 or in that range that we could leverage so that, you know, that $50,000 sounds like a lot of money, but it's not a lot when you're trying to do infrastructure stuff. But any of those, even pieces of any of those grants that you were looking at, pop out as something that we might consider using our money for?
Yeah, so I mean, we have very rudimentary designs of the rain gardens because it's and to those who aren't super familiar with grant applications, it's always this game of you don't want to put too much money and effort in because what if you don't get the money back, right? And so we do a little bit and then we see if we can get more, and then we do a little bit more work and then we see if we can get more. So we do have some simple designs based on mainly where the tie-ins would be. So with a rain garden, you're encouraging infiltration, but you're also, you know, you need an overflow, so it needs to have a pipe that would then connect into the stormwater system. So I have locations, and you know, that's and just like a quick drawing of where we think the best part would be based on our infrastructure and the way our water flows downtown. You know, I will say we did fully design and permit and like have a shovel ready design of dealing with one of the problems that Deputy Chief mentioned in front of Maynard door and window. There's a significant amount of flooding. And for our police officers, that's really bad because if they try to go and leave and it's flooded, they can't get around, or, you know, they have to go all the way around up Sudbury Street to have to get to a call. So we did design a system, a new stormwater system that would pull the water out off of Main Street and then into a what did we call it? It wasn't a rain garden. It was like a gravel. splash pad garden or something. I would have to look back in my notes, but basically right behind town hall, the water would get pulled into that area, would sit there and try to infiltrate, and then anything left over would then overflow into the river. But it was all about the goal of there was not necessarily infiltration, but a lot of making sure that the water was cleaned and was filtered before it reached the river. You know, that project alone, I think, was over 600,000, and we haven't had the money to go forward. And we permitted that like 2 years ago. So yeah, 50,000 is a tough, it sounds like so much money, but it's tough.
Yeah, we might tap your brain and just get some lists before our March 9th meeting, just in case there are some things that we can think about, because we're trying to gather information and see where the best use of $50,000, which isn't very much, but it can do something. So, yeah. And,
We've got one more question online whenever you're ready for it.
okay, well, let's have Kate. Kate can ask a question.
I just wanted to ask back about the heating, are town-owned buildings for seniors and housing authority buildings and those buildings that are state but in town, do we know, you know, is there cooling? Are there cooling systems in all of those?
Yes, so the senior housing at Concord Circle and Potterville Circle, yeah, so they have the heat and the air in their units.
Okay.
So there's not concern in those situations.
Okay.
So, you know, some of the concerns, you know, when you think about it, some of the concerns I now think about are the cost. So I think about people turning their heat down, say, or turning their air conditioning down, not using it, really not using it, to save cost. You know, fixed incomes and how, you know, utilities are just through the roof. And so, you know, we hear that. I think we had a call, someone turned their heat off, and so something burst and you know, there's an issue. And then it's also in the summer too, turning off the air conditioning. It's all about saving money for a lot of our seniors on fixed incomes, and then not using these resources that would keep them warm or cool.
Xana, what's the next question?
Yeah, so if you have concerns about a storm drain that's blocked by something, particularly if it's something that's been there a long time, who would you call? What would that kind of assessment look like for blockage and possibly removal of whatever that obstruction is?
So you can call, definitely call the DPW if you ever have concerns about any sort of storm drain for any reason. Or we also have a form online, and we also, you can email dpw@townofmaynard.net if you'd like to send a picture. We'll most likely ask you to send us a picture to let us know. So, but you can also follow up with a phone call and we'd be happy to help you. Something that I'm working on as data manager is actually right now, if you go onto our GIS online, you can see where all of our sewers are, our sewer infrastructure. And so sewer and water infrastructure, as much as I can put out into the public, as those are protected infrastructure. So, you know, I'm not allowed to point on a map exactly where our wells are, but you can see at least, you know, if there's a water main outside of your house or sewer or something like that. We have that data for our stormwater infrastructure. It's currently on a different map because it's handled by a different company. So right now I am working on trying to get that onto our public GIS. You'll be able to zoom in and say, hey, is there a storm drain outside of my house? I will say our data is old and we are slowly trying to update it. And by update it, I mean like physically go out there and update it. So it takes us a while. We have at least 875 storm drains, plus or minus like 50, because there's also some storm water manholes in that mix as well. And then we have over at least 300 outfalls. So where the water is exiting the system. So that's something that, you know, I'm trying to get public as soon as possible, but you are welcome to email DPW and we can, you know, at least give you a screenshot of that map as we have it right now, and we'll be able to let you know what type of infrastructure you have around your house.
I have a question for Lucas. So you've been a member of this project, right? And you've gotten some additional training on climate change and sustainability, kind of like what we're going to see in terms of extreme weather and stuff like that. And you're also a high school student, so I was wondering, if you could talk a little bit about what you learned in school on climate change, and if you've learned more as a result of this program, or like any thoughts or feedback on education.
I definitely learned more by being part of this program than what I learned in school, because so there is like a class that's dedicated to like climate change, but we don't offer it at the high school. And yeah, like like the only valuable, I guess, lesson that the students got was like the event last year at the. I mean, but like a lot of them know about climate change, but if it's about like specifically applying to Maynard, then I don't think a lot of people know, and yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So the message I'm hearing from you is we need to teach more about it to students so that they have a better idea of what we're doing, and also to help convey to students about sort of emergency issues and how to, and communication is probably the biggest thing that you that you brought to the table here. And I'm listening to Julia and I'm thinking, oh, there's a senior project. You could help us with their storm drain inventory and
I
stuff.
actually, so right now I have 3 seniors. I usually take 3 to 5 seniors every year. So this is my 4th year.
This is great. This is
of having
lovely.
students.
So any other questions, Anna?
That's all I have for now.
All right, any other questions from us? So thank you everyone for participating. This has been great. It's been recorded. It will be posted on our sustainability website, so we can, once you see it, you can pass it along to your friends and as part of education as to what we're doing. And then our next event is on a Sunday. It's March 9th, and it'll be at, I think it'll be in here as well. And what we're really trying to do is brainstorm, how do we spend $50,000 in the best way for the community that has an impact on, and it can be education, it can be some infrastructure stuff, it can be some program that we're missing, but think about that stuff. And those of you online, you know, we're really just trying to gather some information, and we're just trying to figure out where we're missing, or even if this funding can help advance something that we're already kind of working on that makes it full. So that's our challenge. And how many times do you say, hey, we need to spend $50,000, what do you want to spend it on? So,
Do you mind if I do a little plug, Priscilla?
yes, please plug away.
We will be discussing more of our water issues and trying to and discussing some of our long-term and temporary solutions at the select board meeting on March 4th. So if you are around, I highly encourage you. You can go on Zoom, you can come in person. You know, it's so important to have residents. I'm a resident too, but to have all of our voices heard in these conversations. So yeah, please just attend public meetings in general, but definitely try to attend select board meetings.
And I think on the flyer that we had, we also had a place where you could put comments. So if you can't make it on the 9th, you can, there's a place you can, you could submit comments on that too. Xana, have I missed anything?
I think that's everything.
All right. So thank you so much. Thank you for our speakers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for informing us. And now we have to spend some money.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone. Thanks.